Well, thank you for helping us on this call and joining us on our series with everything that has been going on lately.
No worries.
I'm so glad we made it work. Just like my only concern also about yesterday.
No worries. No worries. Thank you.
So she will join us from South Africa, right?
She's here.
Oh, okay.
When she was in South Africa, she committed to whatever this recording or this taping is. And that's what she's doing from her home, but it's in South Africa. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted. I apologize. My dad was admitted to the hospital last night. I'm from New York.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Atlanta, and that was an update on him. He was discharged. So
okay.
I just want to make sure that he's fine. That was over the middle of the night. When it rains, it pours, I guess. I am thankfully headed home on Thursday. Totally unrelated, just a great coincidence. So she committed to this taping while she was in South Africa, which was over the holiday, and she's doing it remotely. And that's the problem. If she were there, it may have been in studio,
mm-hmm.
and it would have been better. But unfortunately, she's at the mercy of whatever platform she's using.
Great that we made everything work. So just to give you a general idea of,
yes,
maybe
please.
It will be useful to give just to briefly mention everything that I wanted to cover, just some questions and some
Please.
macro areas that could work. I have been studying as per I was really into the work that you've been doing at some, like, not only SisterSong, but also many other related institutions and many other related projects. For example, like the program focused on Black women, like Sister Time Women Speak, as being a radio host and having everyone's voice being heard, or the SisterSong Reproductive Justice Collective, which was really, which I'm really passionate about, because when I was in undergrad, I worked for similar collectives around the city that I was studying in Italy, and I've never, I tell you this now, I never found that familiar and safe and welcoming environment again somewhere else. I'm still looking for it, because unfortunately I don't study in Italy anymore, which is something heartwarming. So I was really curious about every project that you've been doing. And yeah, it's going researching about a little bit of the career. I wanted to ask you, what was the first, maybe because there's something that I always ask, why going into public health and then moving on to the nonprofit world and women's health and reproductive rights? And what was the sparkle that, what was the first thing that sparked all of this?
So that is an incredible question to ask Dázon, and you will love her story. Let me first say something I want to correct you on something you said. So you said SisterSong, and we are SisterLove. But I want to tell you that everybody says that. A lot of people say that. There's a great story about SisterSong and SisterLove. They were started by best friends. And SisterSong and SisterLove still remain in the same dwelling to this day. It's just that the original person that started SisterSong at the same time that Dázon started SisterLove has moved on. She, in her own right, her name is Loretta Ross, and you may have come across her name in your studies. She is in her own right an icon in the world of reproductive justice as well. And she and Dázon remain the best of friends. But SisterSong and SisterLove are in the same building here in Atlanta. I do believe started in the same year. And along the top, people get us mixed up the names all the time. I will never do justice to that question for you. And I'm hoping that Dázon will be able to tell it herself. But I want to tell you, on our website, under our founder, the answer to that somewhat is there. But I want to just give you a little bit of what I know about that answer. And I'm also going to, after we hang up, I have your email address. I'd like to send you something I call the pitch deck. I actually send it out to media that inquire, since I'm the comms director, that inquire about us. And it's a snippet of who we are and how we were started and what we concentrate on. That also will help you with shorter answers, but it gives you a framework, if you will, that I'd love for you to have. And I promise that I will send that to your attention.
Oh, yes,
and then it also helps frame out some of the questions going forward. And I find that I find, but journalists find that it's helpful to them. Here she is. Yeah. What a great intro. If there was ever a time for you to enter, if I were a human drum roll, this would be it.
Hi, it's such a pleasure to meet you. We're just introducing the severe topics, but we're gonna explain everything now.
Okay.
Hi.
Oh my gosh, I'm a human drum roll. Hi, you don't need to. I'm gonna go on mute.
I just
hi, Sharon.
Hi, Sharon. I am. It's been a crazy day. Okay, what are we talking about?
Sibi was just telling me that you're now in South Africa, right? And
I'm back.
You're back. Okay.
I'm back. I'm in Atlanta.
How was?
Yeah.
I've seen that much of your work is done between Atlanta and South Africa, and with the project, with the SisterLove in South Africa program, which is as old as I am, because I'm from 1999. How's everything there? How was coming back there? How's the program going?
The program is going fine in South Africa, doing amazing work. The team last week was just visiting. We're closing out a program down in the Western Cape. So they were working with our staff and the teams that we work with on that end. They're doing some incredible, amazing stuff, quite frankly. It's working primarily at the intersections of HIV and gender-based violence. And then there's the human rights context of LGBTQ inclusion and safety and all of that kind of stuff. So we do intersectional work in some ways and they do intersectional work in other ways, and it's all the same. And it's really great. Yeah, I had a chance to spend about, is that the right color? I think not. To spend about, what was it? About 6-7 weeks with them. And it was really cool. Very, very cool.
How is it to move between the States and South Africa, and especially with all the work that you're doing regarding HIV and inclusivity? How do you feel the shift between one reality and the other? Do you feel like the major changes in one area or the other, like the Southeast area compared to another continent, which is South Africa?
You know, what's really interesting and beautiful about our work is that we're very intentional about finding our common ground.
Oh, I love that color, by the way.
Huh?
I love that color, by the way.
Oh, I'm glad.
Great burgundy red. Yeah.
It wasn't exactly the one I was going for, but it works.
Great.
Thank you.
This mood for 2022, like it wasn't what I was going for, but it's working. Like so far.
You know what? That's a t-shirt.
We're making this work.
That's how we do. Yeah. It's not what I was going for.
But it's working.
But it's working. It's true. It's true. It's the theme of it all. So interestingly enough, when people even ask, so why are you in South Africa? Why are you doing that work? It's like, because as a small organization, we had to find the space where our capacity had the most impact. And also where it wasn't that far a stretch from our own lived experiences, right? So interestingly enough, there's a lot of common ground. There's a lot of commonality, a lot of synergy even between how, as a Southerner in the United States and as a Southern African, our lives, especially for women, are quite parallel in a lot of ways. So children who have been a part of a civil rights movement, children who are now adults and can share that history of being in whether it was Jim Crow versus apartheid, that all of that aligns for us. But also the fact that focusing in, for example, on Black women in the US and in the Deep South, and which is what I call more than a geographic distinction.
Yeah.
And then with Black women in South Africa in particular, and then dealing with HIV and sexual and reproductive health rights and justice issues, there's almost no daylight between us. So it's actually been a beautiful journey. It's been worth sustaining for 23 years now. And it's also joy, right? Because what I do find that's different is the engagement around understanding intersectionality is also it's almost like this beautiful unfolding flower, if you will. It's a bud that just keeps opening up. I'm a part of the RJ community here. I'm a godmother to the reproductive justice movement in the United States. And we're one of the few organizations that's also intentional about building greater solidarity globally around reproductive justice. There's no other place right now that I think gets it right off the bat around how reproductive justice speaks a lot more to Black women's sexual and reproductive health issues than the larger sexual SRHR, so the sexual and reproductive health and rights movement does. And so that is the other reason why, and how, I don't want to use the word easy, but how, how much more synergistic our work is because of the alignment around racial justice. There are not a whole lot of African countries where the issue of being relegated to second class because you're Black has been the core issue inside that country. And so that's what builds this greater solidarity for us working in South Africa and in some ways in Southern Africa. And it's beautiful. It's a struggle, but it's a beautiful struggle.
I'm so I'm so happy about everything that you mentioned. Like it's a reality that's quite far away from me, but I can totally envision and see all the similarities and all the common, perhaps like the common ground that you have and that we can find between two different realities. Oh God, I have so many questions. Regarding, we have worked at Until with I think with more than a couple of Southern non-profit and realities that revolved around LGBT and homelessness and solidarity, community building. One was Life Moves, and we worked with so many different realities, and we touched base a little bit on how it is to work being in the South compared to other realities in other parts of the states. And I know that may sound as a very particular question, but right before our interview, I was reading an article, which is like more of an essay, which said it's called "Perfection is a Myth Unless You're a Woman of Color," which I know that like it's quite renowned, is quite well known. And I stumbled across this quote that I totally wanted to hear your thoughts about it. It says, I can also copy and paste it. It says, I think that, wait, let me also copy and paste it here. I think that women of color are the ultimate time travelers. We exist in so many places at once, present so many facades, tell so many versions of stories, knock on so many doors. we also live a life where it's sometimes impossible to exist as ourselves, tropey, mediocre, imperfect. Please, I just wanted to like set this, put my step forward and hear your thoughts about this quote.
So it's interesting because, you know, as women of color, and especially as Black women, there's another level to that. And so there's also a poem, I think it was by Nikki Giovanni, We Wear the Mask. I know Lawrence, Jacob Lawrence, no, that's the artist. Paul Lawrence, whoever, it'll come to me in a minute. Langston Hughes wrote about Black people in the mask, but I think Nikki Giovanni wrote about it more succinctly about Black women. The thing is, I call Black women also uniquely ubiquitous, right? Because the thing is that all human DNA exists in Black women, right? Period. Because of being the origins, if you will, of this current version of ourselves. And so it's very interesting that as the original people, we also become the bottom of any caste system, any totem pole, any racial aligning of where people sit in terms of power and presence in society, right? And so we are chameleons. We live so many different lives, so many different faces. We speak so, even if English is our only language, the kinds of English we speak in different places. So that's code switching is another word that we use in our community. Another word that this brings up for us, and I love this notion of perfection, because there's nothing that we can do right by just being ourselves. We have to be 10, 15, 20 times better, faster, smarter, stronger, closer, whatever the words are to compete and compare. Just being who we are is never, ever, 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 ever enough. And it literally is sometimes feels impossible to exist as ourselves. And so I can see that, and I can agree with that. And at the same time, that perfectionism that is a myth, it's created by the same myth that is white supremacy. It's created by the same myth that is patriarchy, right? So you create this impossible thing to achieve, which is white supremacy, is, you know, it only exists when you believe it, and when it gets in, and when it's so believed that it is then put into practice, right? Perfectionism is the same thing. It's impossible until you believe it, and then you try to put everything in place to make it happen, and we generally fail, right? So the other word that a lot of, or phraseology that people are grappling with, especially Black women and women of color, is that imposter syndrome, right? That we don't, no matter how freaking fabulous we are, that we're always second guessing whether we belong or not, whether we're enough or not. And so we end up creating, from a positive standpoint, our own affirmations about the fact that we are enough. One of the most popular things that's running right now as a theme on Black TikTok and on Black women TikTok right now is this whole idea that the most important, the most powerful thing that Black women can do with their TikTok is to just be nothing, just to
exist.
I can show up and
Really?
just do the least, and I am the most. Right? That's what we have to reprogram, re-socialize, to deconstruct. We have to do all of that to restore what I consider our rightful place on this planet, which is at the top of the human chain and not the bottom.
Totally. This brings me being also a huge fan of Black TikTok and being following so many wonderful artists, creators, and activists on Black TikTok. I have like, I'm familiar with all the. It's like a video game, but the levels keep getting difficult and more difficult while this patriarchy heteronormative society just setting up standards that we don't, not only we don't want to strive for, because we don't feel like they're for us, even for our generation, for new generations, like we see these standards being pushed upon us, and we know that they're not like realistic. So it's really true when, with the quote, loving yourself, it's the most rebellious and revolutionary act that we can do in a world that doesn't want Black women, women of color, to just exist peacefully and feel like they are enough, just existing the way they are and never feeling like they're taking up too much space. Because I feel like space is such a important concept now in everyday life, as a woman, and especially for the women of color community, and taking up space, it's something like it's very debated. I don't know if you've seen the film The Help, which is like I stumbled across another quote. It said, one of the main protagonists said to a white man, which was a landlord, of course you're not interested in politics, you're no interested in changing a world that suits you so well. And this, it's like really what it's bringing us here, communicating across the sides of the globe and across different countries. I feel like everything that you've been doing at SisterLove and now is this. Totally.
Yeah, no, I have seen The Help. I read The Help. It had a lot of problematic parts to it. Because there's on the one hand, when you combine the ideology and the systems that it supports around patriarchy and white supremacy, when you put those two things together, then all the other stuff, the heteronormativity, the homophobia, the transphobia, all of that stuff, the sexism and misogyny and misogynoir, all of that comes from these larger rubrics of white supremacy and patriarchy that are working in tandem. And they both are dying a very slow death. And so we are very intentional about speeding that death up. And that, I think, is a large part, if not almost all of the core of what's happening in terms of all of the changes that are going on, all of the conflicts that are happening, all of the movements that are building, because the response, or I think the death knell to that white supremacy and patriarchy is organized, unified solidarity from the intersections that exist in the margins. So all of those marginalized issues, as well as marginalized peoples, are starting to see that the intersections are real and that they are where we connect, and that as we connect and as we build and organize and unify, we become a force great enough to destroy white supremacy, to destroy xenophobia, to destroy patriarchy. We can build that, right? Because there are more of us than there are of them. And that in and of itself speaks to the work that we do around asserting and protecting women's bodily autonomy, our human rights, our access to all things sexual reproductive health, rights, and justice, is because when we organize and we come together and decide for ourselves the lives we want and build the environments that we need to have the lives we want, then it has to happen in defiance of and in the destruction of the current structures that are not built to serve us.
And we have to rebuild a better and safer environment for everyone.
Which is what I think coronavirus has been telling us, is that y'all just need to stop and think about this and rebuild something better for everybody, not just one country or the other, but for everybody. And until you get this right, this is going to be affecting the entire world.
Totally. Coronavirus showed us how communities are keys and how they are important when it comes to protecting categories that they're at risks, and trying to support each other. And like this isolated capitalist world will not stay longer here, because it's not sustainable anymore.
Right, because, and it also shows that the Western, Northern creation of the notion of science is also limited, right? Because they can't explain why there are so many places where even in the exposure of coronavirus with no vaccines, people are finding ways to be healthier, to prevent it, and to survive it if they become infected with coronavirus without ever getting a test or a vaccine. And I'm a witness to it. I've seen it. And so there's a different science there that we're not understanding, because we have created this, you know, very finite shape of what science is and how it's regarded and what is valued and how it's powered, without recognizing that, you know, we didn't invent it. We didn't invent it. Right.
There is so much more than we don't know.
Exactly.
So I was talking to Sybil also. I was looking at the website of SisterLove, and I was having a look also at the career that you had and all the different experiences. So one of the questions that I would have asked you will be, what brought you to public health? And what was the spark? Like, what was the first thing that sparked your curiosity when it came to getting into the reproductive and women's reproductive health and rights and public health in overall?
Wow. So there are different steps to all of that. I would start with the latter first. So when I was a student at Spelman College, which is here in Atlanta, it's one of the only 2 all Black women's institutions of higher learning in the US. First thing I got into was the anti-apartheid movement on my campus. This was in the early 80s. And during that, so I'm already a little politicized because of that engagement, that activism work that I started from the first week that I was a student all the way to when I graduated, because it took us, well, the fight had been going on, but it took another 4 years before we got the board of trustees to divest from South Africa. And that was my graduating year. Nonetheless, during that time, I was introduced, and I'm still a member, to the National Black Women's Health Project, which it was not that. It actually started with the first ever conference on Black women's health that has ever been held in this country was in 1983. That's not that long ago.
No.
And I happened to be there because I was on campus that summer. That changed my entire life because it was a moment. First of all, I was fangirling because all the Black women writers that you've just been talking about. So there's Angela Davis and June Jordan. And
I have a copy of Freedom is a Constant Struggle, like right here on my desk.
1983, I'm 18 years old, and here's, or 17, and here's the Sweet Honey in the Rock walking across my campus, June Jordan and Angela Davis and Toni K. Bambara, and all of these writers that, I'm learning from and studying, and all of these people, Paula Giddings, that I'm following and learn. Oh, so I go to this meeting about the reality of being Black and female and how it is our stories and how we are able to connect through our stories to solve our own problems. That opened my eyes to the whole world around sexual and reproductive health. And then I ended up working in a women's health clinic, and it was the only nonprofit abortion clinic in Atlanta. And so I was already doing this work, but definitely from a feminist perspective, not from a public health perspective, definitely from a perspective of women's rights and women's bodily autonomy and human rights, right? Even though I didn't have the human rights language yet. So that's what I was doing. And then ended up volunteering in the HIV space, blah, 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 and then created SisterLove. How I got into public health was, it dawned on me at some point that the work that I was doing was public health work. It was in community. It was through a community organization. So it wasn't government, but it was public health, right? Because public health is so much more than just that notion of governmental preventive health services. So what I made the decision was, if I'm going to grow this organization, this nonprofit organization, and I knew I needed to get another degree because I started this organization right out of college. So I knew I needed to get another degree at some point. I come from a family of educators. So I wanted to go and get my master's. And the only thing that made sense at that time was to go get a master's in creating. What I said is, I need to go get some theory to my practice. You know, people usually put practice to theory, right? I needed to go put some theory to our practice. And that's how I ended up going to graduate school and learning how much of the work that we were doing is actually public health, but also how little of what we could create and generate from a community perspective was integrated or included in the public health responses. So I knew very early on that doing community-based health work had to disrupt the public health space. And so that's what we've been doing at SisterLove ever since, is finding the community-driven ways to do the public health piece differently. And with more success and with more impact.
Totally. As you said, the public health image that we get from the government isn't always so open and so for everyone as it seems, starting from abortion bans to having nonprofit close to you that resources and solidarity that the community can use when it comes to having checkups or medications. Like, as I know that in the States, because we briefly touched upon this in other interviews, it's a very controversial and complicated topic when it comes to the debate between free healthcare and public hospitals and private and insurance. I luckily have an American flatmate now at university, because I'm also getting my master's, and then she's always telling me how it is, how different it is in the States, and all the controversies that surround healthcare. And I can imagine, because I of course I don't know, but I can imagine how for marginalized groups and how for minorities, how hard it can be to have access to what we take for granted here in Europe, on the European side of the world. I know how impressive that might have been for you.
No, I was just going to say, I just, sorry to interrupt you, but just my thought on that is, it's because health, preventive health, healthcare, however you want to slice it, in the United States is a clear casualty of capitalism, right? So people, you say public health, and people think that is the most extent to which we need to be providing healthcare for people who don't have other means to cover access to it, right? When, if you embraced health as a human right, you would snatch it away from this capitalist context, and you would put it in a much more social context where everyone is treated equally and everyone has access to quality health. And that's what we don't have, and that's where that conflict is. And so, yeah, that's the part of the problem, is that if it was the people's health and if it was people-centered, then it would be different. There is a woman who is actually the head of an HIV program in a public health department, in a city health department. And when Corona hit, you know, all of us who are in HIV pretty much got drawn into the coronavirus because of the similarities and the needs of response, right? She said something so powerful, and then, I'm sorry, we'll get back to whatever I interrupted, but she said something so powerful once when she says that her job right now is scrambling to try to rebuild or reinvent a health system that was never meant for us to survive. It was never meant to heal us. It was never meant to serve us. And so how are we going to rebuild something that wasn't built for us in the first place? And when I say us, we're talking predominantly about people of color, about women, about the people in the margins, as we started out this conversation. And she's so absolutely right. So we're going to have to dismantle what it is and reconstruct a whole new thing that actually does serve as health care, and not what Dr. Jocelyn Elders would have called, we don't have a healthcare system in this country, we have a sick care system in this country. And so that's what I think is that's what has to happen.
Totally, especially with the notion of care work and how care work in so many countries isn't viewed as work. And as history says, especially women, and like typically women, and especially women of color, have been the head, like the leading force when it comes to care work.
Exactly.
And now this pandemic taught us that we can't live without care. So like, who's gonna dismantle and, as you said, rebuild a system that is actually centered around people and not profits? Because
Exactly.
this is what is now.
That's what it is.
I was very curious if you wanted to share a moment that made you feel closer and made you like realize that the work for the HIV community and the work for the the minorities affected from the HIV and involved in the HIV conversations, if there was a moment in your life that you felt like, this is what I want to do, I'm right place, right time, I want to help, I want to pour everything that I know into this idea. So going from the public health decision to the HIV, because I know working at Until, it may be different for all of us. I know that like my supervisor has had like this moment, that like my colleague, other interns, and it's different for all of us. So if you wanted to share those.
So I don't, it's, for me, it's really interesting, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this one, to capture defining moments, mostly because I'm an organic person, right? So I just follow whatever the universe puts me on a path to do. I'm not one of those that sits and plans. Vision boards freak me out, right? I'm like, as my grandmother used to say, my nana used to say, man plans while God laughs, right? So I move in what, I'm a gut person. I move with intuition. So there wasn't a moment where I said, this is what I'm going to do. Or when that moment happens, I articulate it, but I'm not necessarily intentional about it. So it's hard. What I can say, though, is that in knowing that my decision to do this work was the right thing, right? So the defining moment around starting SisterLove was realizing that working in a white feminist space, there wasn't going to be an HIV community built out of that, especially for Black women. But there is a moment when I realized that this is that the decision I took to do this work and to do it the way I do it was the right thing, was not that long ago. Well, it was 2012, but I was at a conference, we were at a training, and this training was sponsored by a pharmaceutical. I was one of their trainers, and the room was about 90% full of people living with HIV. And they're all here to be trained because now they're all coming on as spokespersons for this company. And in my talk, somewhere in the midst of it, I just happened to mention, it's a phrase I say all the time, is that while I'm not living with HIV in my body, I do live with HIV in my life, right? And the whole room shifted. And you got to know your room, know your people, know the room, feel the room. And so I said, what was that? And so it stayed quiet for a second. And I didn't know if I had said the wrong thing or the right thing. And one woman, she stood up, she said, Dázon, are you standing here telling us you don't have HIV? And I said, no, I don't. I've never been diagnosed. And last time I got tested, I was still negative. And almost everybody in the room was like, all this time, girl, we thought that you were one of us. We thought that you were living with HIV. We thought that da 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 da. For a lot of people, that might have been an uncomfortable moment. It might have been, some folks might have been insulted. Some folks might have felt ashamed by that or whatever. I just cried. I can't tell you how affirming that is, how just being me and being my authentic self was enough that my HIV status was not even a matter to me. And by presenting myself that way, people living with HIV assumed that I had HIV because that's how close I aligned with their stories.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how I did it. I don't know. I still don't know, other than I see people just as they are, and they are to be loved. And that's it. And so that for me was the defining moment that I knew that there's nothing else I should be doing in this life other than working to make things better, and to secure the human rights for people who, whatever reasons, HIV being one of them, but that people who are buried under all kinds of isms and all kinds of oppressions and are cast to the side, neglected, treated badly, surviving traumas, whatever that is that I don't have to know it. I don't have to understand it. But as long as I can accept it as a reality for someone else, then I can be a part of it.
Must have been so powerful and so heartwarming to
Absolutely.
to realize
it filled
how
my soul. It filled my entire soul.
And the community was also filled back, and the community was also empowered by this act of courage, bravery, and with all the honesty and with all the trueness, like with being our most authentic selves.
Well, you know what? This just hit me, Sharon. So I'm sorry, because there actually could be a blog out of this, but it just hit me that it is it's not only my authentic self, it is, and the moment just left me. It'll come back. Sorry, I have mental pause. It's a real thing. It'll come back, but it was big.
Don't worry.
Okay, keep going. It'll come back.
I imagine how empowering must have been for all the people that surrounded you and that loved you, and you were building greater things and greater systems with, to be empowered by this honesty, like radical honesty. I always ask, this is like my signature question, I always ask, what is a quote or a saying that you live by? But in your case, I wanted to rephrase that. I wanted to say, what would you, like, what is one quote or a saying that you live by that you wanted to share with younger women, especially women of color, that you feel like, here's this quote, and I give it to you, and you can do whatever you want with it. But it's important that I let it out, and it's important that as many people as possible can hear that and can see that.
I have so many Dázon isms. I think that one of them that's most important for me, that is a lesson that I've learned, and it's very personal. So it's not about movement work. It's not about being in the space or all of that, but it is that, especially when I'm talking with young Black women in particular, is that first and foremost, the power is all ours. It's all yours. And no matter what society, no matter what systems, no matter what people, no matter what messages, no matter what art, books, no matter what anybody says, they can never take away the reality of the fact is that all humanity starts with us, which gives us all the power and all the responsibility and the accountability for it. And that is the conundrum in the Black woman's life, that we not only bear the burden, but we also bear that responsibility. and at the same time are relegated to the bottom of the heap of humanity. So always remember that for those intersections, for those things that are converging in our lives, it's because deep, deep, deep in their consciousness of multi-generations, everybody knows that the power lies with us. And therefore, we are a threat. So be the threat. So that's one, is be the threat. It's okay. Be the threat. Be all your power, be all yourself. And the other one is that we choose our feelings. Emotions are actually choices. That if you don't like how you're feeling about something, you can actually change how you feel about it. It's not easy. There's no straight answer for how to do it, but you have the power to do it. And so by controlling and owning all your emotions, then you also get to decide how you respond to things and how you choose to do things and how to not respond and how to not do things. So happiness is a choice. Joy is a choice, right? But so are anger and lonely, right? So there are different ways to feel about things. And if a mental imbalance is a part of that problem, then there are also solutions and healing strategies to move through those so that you can choose the feelings that you want. But your feelings are your choice.
This is very powerful. This is just the only word that I can think about. It's very heartwarming and powerful, and also hopeful. It gives so much hope, especially with this.
And I remembered the power that I was going to say about that
Yes.
feeling. A lot of people responded and reacted to me because their first reaction is always, so you're doing all of this work on behalf of other people when you don't even have HIV. You don't have a family member who's had HIV or has died of HIV. And you're doing all of this for us. And of course, my first answer is I'm doing it for myself because I feel it's the right thing to do. But if not the people who are not living with HIV, who have privilege of talking about their health, talk about their health status, who don't have shame about that, who don't get discarded because of that, it is our duty to stand in solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
It is our duty to change the hearts and minds of the other people who do treat you that way. The same way it's men's duty to end misogyny and sexism, it's white people's duty to end racism and racial injustice. It is all the people who actually have all the privilege, it's their job to stop the oppression. It is not the job of the oppressed to stop it. It is to stop being oppressed, but it's not to stop the oppression. So I'm a part of the responsibility and the solution to making sure that the space for your voice is there.
Yes, I totally agree, and not only I relate. In the feminist movement and in the feminist collective, they've been navigating for a while since I was in my first year of undergrad. We always say it's not the job of the oppressed to educate the oppressor. It's not their job. As allies, we have the privilege to do that.
Exactly.
Is there is there now a challenge that you wanted to share regarding the SisterLove and the SisterLove project and movement, and that has been going, especially after 2 years in the pandemic? Is there a challenge that you wish to overcome and also to communicate, to share with everyone?
Well, I actually thank you for that question, because in terms of a challenge, if there's two things I would say about that. So in response to, did my phone ring? I was supposed to get a call at 12 o'clock. No, it did not. Okay. That there was, that the first challenge is actually a challenge I gave us at the beginning of the COVID, first part of the initial lockdown, quarantining, whatever they want to call it. What we said, because it was a monumental shift, everybody's going home. How are we going to do this? And I was like, I don't know exactly how we're going to do this, but what I do know is that whenever we come out of this, we will be better. We have to be better than we were before we went in. That's our aim. That's what we're going to do with this time of a pandemic, right? In the days of a pandemic. So, and that's still a challenge. That is a challenge for us to be better as an organization, as people who are working together, as women in a movement. That still is a part of our challenge, and we're dealing with it almost every day, infrastructure wise, programmatically. How are we doing programs differently to meet people's needs? How are we shifting our programs to actually meet what's happening in the current times, right? We can't, it's not business as usual, and the stuff that we were doing before that cannot work in the current environment. Let's not keep trying to push a square peg through a round hole. Let's figure out something new and different. So innovating has been the challenge that I have placed upon us, or that is in front of us all the time. The other bigger challenge that I'm really oftentimes constantly trying to figure out is how we've already talked about, building solidarity at the intersections and all of that, is I think in the midst of all of that is how do we work through all of how do we do a better job at making or putting to practice how we celebrate our differences and our distinctions, our discords, but actually figure out how we consistently stay together and do the work where we have commonality and where the solidarity actually lives within our commonness. So commonness. So that, for example, inside reproductive justice, there has to be space for people who don't support abortion, right?
Okay.
But they definitely believe in racial justice and economic justice and climate justice and equity in a whole lot of areas, which means that even if they don't support abortion, they're not going to actively organize against someone else having access. So those are the challenges that we have to figure out, is how to be different, but still do our work where we are in commonality.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a goal that I really hope, and I believe it's possible to achieve it. So
yeah,
we have to
I
keep
agree.
working.
I agree.
It was really an honor to have you on our Empowering Voices series. It was an honor for me to talk to you and to Sibyl. It was definitely one of those life-changing moments, like one of those time frames kind of moments. Was
wow.
really great.
So Sharon, thank you for that. And thank you for including us. I am so happy about this. Until it's a bracelet I have not taken off. See that?
Yes.
I've had this one, I don't know, 20 years. So I'm grateful to all our people at Until. But where are you actually sitting? Where in the world
Now
are
I'm
you?
in Italy, but I normally live in Switzerland because I study there.
Okay. All right.
Moving around.
Overstood. Absolutely.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you. Enjoy the rest
Sharon.
of your day, because here it's night. Like, I think it's pretty early there.
Right. It's what? Is it 7? It's 6 or 7?
Yes, it is 6.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy your evening and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Really, thank you. Bye.